Hi, everybody. This is the Democrats of the Red Rocks Political Film Group. So happy to have everybody here. I'm Frankie, and Mick Jordal is a co-host, and I'm going to hand over the floor to Mick, who's going to introduce our guest, Sonia, or participant guest, Sonia.
Okay, hey everybody, great to see you. This is one of the highlights of my month. I know every month, so is discussing great films. So yeah, if you would just raise your hand if you want to comment. And I think we've all been through the drill and we know what it is. So just really appreciate your presence today. Well, we have a very special guest, a person that's been a participant in our film series and discussions, and actually has some real expertise in our topic. And we're discussing the Roma. She actually did her master's thesis on Roma education at Columbia University. After that, she worked for the Open Society Foundation for, golly, maybe, what was it, 10 years or something, a long time. And she happens to be my cousin, so I know her well. And every time I would try to contact her, she'd be in one of the countries that ended with Stan, S-T-A-N. So, and places that I didn't know about and always learned a lot. So basically what I'll do is turn it over to Sonia. She'll have some, introductory comments on both the films and her experience, I think, with the Roma. And then Frankie can lead off with the first questions for Sonia. But thanks so much, Sonia, for coming. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks so much, Mick and Frankie. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak on this topic. I'm in no way an expert on Roma, but I have spent some of my time in regions where Roma live and where they've been discriminated against. And really, I became very passionate about their cause when I was a master's student at Columbia's Teachers College, and decided to write my master's thesis on that. As Mick said, I'll go back a little further and just say that I studied political science at UC Santa Barbara and really focused on international relations and political theory there, and did a double major also in Slavic languages and literature. And then as part of my undergraduate work, I studied abroad in the Soviet Union in Leningrad in 1989. And that was my first exposure experience meeting Roma people. After that, I was completely, caught the bug and wanted to go back as often as possible. I worked 2 summers in orphanages in provincial cities outside of Moscow. And there also encountered children of the Roma community and how they were treated. So that really started my journey on this topic. It was for about 9 years that I administered the Muskie Freedom Support Act Graduate Fellowship Program for another NGO in Washington, D.C. first, and then for the Open Society Institute at the time. So I was traveling all over the former Soviet Union and encountering different groups, and in Eastern Europe, different groups of Roma, as we can talk about in a minute. So there was something I just wanted to read, because the Open Society Foundations really spent a lot of time and energy on Roma issues. And just to give you a background with their connection, I'll read something from their website. The Roma Initiatives Office works with activists and communities across Europe to achieve long-term change for Roma. The Roma Initiatives Office works to achieve equal opportunities for Roma in housing, employment, and education. We also facilitate dialogue, exchange, and collaboration across the Open Society Foundations to coordinate efforts, increase knowledge, and enhance the impact of Roma-related grant-making and advocacy. Our work builds on Open Society's 30 years of support for Roma and pro-Roma civil society organizations focused on promoting active political participation at European, national, and local levels. We work with thousands of Roma women and men who have taken up leadership roles in their communities. We also work through mobilization campaigns and training to nurture the next generation of Roma leaders. I worked in the scholarship department at Open Society Institute, and we had scholarships for Roma. I went through my notes and I went through the internet. A lot of what I'm going to say is stuff that you can easily Google, but just because we're here on the topic, I'll try to sort of curate some of the highlights that are important things to know about Roma. And I'm really excited. I was so excited, it probably showed last time we met, that you were interested in Roma themed films, because there's such a connection for me with what we saw with Nomadland and what we saw with these two films. And some of the shared themes, which we'll go into later, I'm sure, for me, were just that these cultures, these are both cultures, the one we saw in Nomadland and the one we saw in these films, desiring freedom and movement over confinement, that are experiencing exclusion and devaluing, that are struggling with and against their circumstances, and celebrating together and feeling unity with a larger culture or subculture, and really connecting with nature. And there was just so much there that I kept thinking about as I watched these films. So historians, I mean, this was very evident in Latcho Drom, but historians think the Roma's ancestors first arrived in Europe from northern India through what is now Iran, Armenia, and Turkey. They gradually spread their way across the whole of Europe from the 9th century onwards for the last 1,000 years. This is something I found on the internet, because the question is sort of why, right? Why? But the exact reasons why Roma left central and northeastern India has not yet been clarified and remains open for further investigation. And on a Roma founded website, a Roma founded nonprofit supporting the Roma community, I'll read a quote. Our language, Romani, which belongs to the Indo-Aryan languages group, has been and remains the fingerprint of both our origins and our migration route, for it contains within itself the connection of the languages of the peoples we have come into contact with, such as the Greeks, Persians, and Armenians, and the pre-European era. So if anyone wonders whether we are Europeans or not, the answer is found in these historical facts. We were most probably living in the Byzantine Empire, the territory of what is today's Greece, before 1200. And there is consistent written evidence of our presence in European soil dating back to 1400, which is in fact when the first accounts of our deportations and expulsions appeared. By 1450, we had spread throughout Europe. So as we know, traditionally, Roma traveled from place to place, although the majority of Roma now are settled. They include, artisans, for example, wood and copper craft workers, farm workers, blacksmiths, musicians, fortune tellers, and entertainers. At first, they were often welcomed for their skills, but governments and the church soon started to see them as suspicious outsiders and even heathens. The word Roma means man and refers to a lot of different subgroups. You might have heard of Sinti, that's a larger group in Germany, Italy, and France, but there are many different subgroups, but they are united under the term Roma. In most languages, gypsy or whatever term is used is considered insulting and is rejected by Roma organizations. It became an accepted global term in 1971 when representatives of Roma communities adopted a flag, an anthem, and an international day. So treatment of the Roma in many regions, Roma were forced into actual slavery, a practice which continued until the 19th century in Romania and elsewhere. Roma were also sentenced to death throughout the medieval era in England, Switzerland, and Denmark, and then later grew into organized persecution. Many countries, including Germany, Poland, and Italy, ordered the expulsion of all Roma. In the 1930s, the Nazi Germans and hundreds of thousands of them during the Holocaust. And the number I keep coming up on the internet with is at least 250,000 victims from the Holocaust.
Oh.
After the war, Roma continued to be discriminated against and oppressed, especially in the Soviet Union. And between 1970s and 1990s, the Czech Republic and Slovakia sterilized around 90,000 Romani women against their will. Today, there is no official or reliable count of Romani populations worldwide. In Europe, there are thought to be between 10 and 12 million. Most of them, around 2/3, live in Central and Eastern Europe, where they make up about 5 to 10% of the population. There are also sizable Romani minorities in Western Europe, especially in Italy, Spain, France, and the UK. And today they continue to experience persecution. and discrimination, millions of Roma live in isolated slums, often without any electricity or running water. They struggle to get the health care they need. Many live with the daily threat of forced evictions, police harassment, and violent attacks. Romani children also often suffer segregation in schools. This was essentially the topic of my thesis. They're segregated and they receive a lower standard of education. And in my experience, especially in the orphanages, they were thought by the caretakers to be disabled or mentally ill and just completely marginalized. The impact: Roma have more health problems, worse housing, lower literacy levels. In Central and Eastern Europe, they can expect to live 10 years less than others. They have the lowest life expectancy in Europe. On average, they also earn less and are more likely to be unemployed. Without jobs, obviously, they can't afford proper housing, good health care, or quality education. On one website I was looking at, this was a wonderful way of putting it. This situation is not the inevitable result of poverty. It is because of centuries of prejudice and discrimination from governments, institutions, and individuals. Together, they have pushed the great majority of Roma to the margins of society and kept them there. A wonderful site I wanted to share called Rom Archive, that is a Roma-led initiative that really supports and promotes the cultural heritage of the Roma people. I found a quote on their site that was wonderful, said, "Despite the history of persecution, discrimination, and marginalization, we Roma have a rich cultural heritage, one that is part of European culture and has contributed to its development." And all of that cultural heritage is now visible on this website, Rom Archive. The Roma people are determined to resist the injustice. Decades ago, Roma began organizing internationally, and in recent years, Roma activists and leaders have begun to grow in numbers, helped by a generation of university-educated Roma graduates, some of which the Open Society Foundations have supported. These activists are working to organize their communities, build grassroots change, and demand political action for justice. A couple resources I wanted to mention that are really useful to look at are the European Roma Rights Center, which was founded in the mid-1990s by activists inspired by the legal victories of the civil rights movement in the United States. One professor that I have learned more about and am really inspired by is Ethel Brooks, who is the board chair of the European Roma Rights Center and an associate professor in the departments of Women's and Gender Studies and Sociology at Rutgers University. She has a number of other things to be proud of, but in 2016, President Obama appointed her to the United States Memorial Council. She's a member of the US delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and on the boards of a number of journals and organizations, including the Rom Archive and the USC Shoah Foundation. And I really encourage you, I'll try to put this in the chat, but there's a wonderful video statement she makes for the 2020 European Holocaust Memorial Day for Sinti and Roma commemoration. And it's so interesting to listen to their relationship with the Holocaust and the continuing persecution of the Roma. And the most famous, I suppose, one of the most famous Roma people that you might all know is guitarist Django Reinhardt. If anybody is familiar with he's a Belgian-born pioneering virtuoso jazz guitarist and composer. I know I learned about him through Woody Allen, I believe, but in any case, that's interesting. And I have many thoughts on both films that I'll share during our discussion, but I hope this has helped give a little context. And I just want to thank you all so much for letting me speak about the Roma. And if you'd like to know more about any of these sources, just reach out. And I just want to take this moment to really thank you all for welcoming Bill and I into this group during the pandemic. It's been a light and joy for us to participate when we've been able. You let us come and go, and it's really been appreciated so much. And I hope that, you know, we'll meet in person one day if we get to come out and visit our relatives in the area. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you. It's been a pleasure that you've been joining us. So thank you. So
much to the,
I'm going to jump in, and then Ellen, you can go next.
no, I just wanted to thank her because she's added so much to
Yes.
the group.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, and that was great context. So great films. Thank you for choosing these. I thought they were really interesting pairing. I loved Acasa. I am stunned that that's a documentary, and that, I mean, the time that was invested in making the documentary was just, the whole thing was stunning to me. And I think the musical documentary was a sort of nice like background for that. I've had a couple experiences with the Romani. I'm Austrian, my family's Austrian. And when I was a kid, I went to Austria with my grandmother, and one of our cousins-in-law was a Romani woman who was married to one of the cousins, and she rode a motorcycle. She was super cool. And I remember when I first met her, my grandmother whispered to me, "She's a gypsy. Like, be careful," right? Yeah. And then I had so that was the first time that I thought, that's interesting. Plus she was so super cool with the motorcycle. Then I was there's a gold band scam that's very popular in Paris that the Romani are involved in, and I got to participate in that as a traveler. And then when I lived in Italy very briefly as a study abroad host, we ran into a Romani woman at the market in Florence. I was with an Italian friend, and it was very clear. And she was a progressive young woman, my Italian friend. It was very clear that she was very, very cautious, and told me that I was not allowed to talk to this Romani woman. I needed to keep a distance. She was very dangerous. So this was a couple years ago. So all of those things have always made me wonder about people who are on the margins, and what it means to be like a not part of the state, and how frightening that is. But then I was thinking about the difference between the folks in nomad land and then these folks. I mean, it seems that they're both on the periphery by choice, but just the ways that race and class seem to sort of mix, and of course ethnicity, right? Because this is sort of an ethnic group. So I guess I was interested in Sonia, your reactions about the typicality of this example of these folks. And
Yeah.
yeah, not so much how accurate it is, because of course it's accurate, it was a documentary, but like, just how does it fit in the broader picture of what you know?
Yeah, I think I struggled a little bit when Mick and I were talking about which films to watch, and I spent a lot of time looking because I hadn't seen too many films about the Roma, and I wanted to make sure we picked accurate portrayals, or at least give a variety. And that's why I love the way these two films complement each other in a way, because Acasa is not a film about the Roma, and it's not even explicitly presented in the film, but we can see the discrimination, we can see the racism and the marginalization. And in some ways that's very powerful. But I think I don't have a lot of firsthand experience with Rome, knowing this is really the story of a particular family forcibly removed from a particular situation. So it is important. It was very important to me that we balance this with a different film. And I can, say more later, but I found it really such an amazing choice to pick Latcho Drom. And when I heard of it first, when Mick suggested it, I thought, I don't know, it's a musical and it doesn't tell much beyond the music, but it profoundly affected me to see the journey. And I watched it, carefully, and really, it showed many different groups, many different lands, many different parts of the story and the history. So I think this is a starting point if for anyone who's interested in learning more about these communities. And I think there's a lot more out there. The filmmaker of Latcho Drom has made a number of films about Roma, and I haven't seen them, so I can't speak to them, but I would imagine it's important to see a variety of them to really see, you know, the variety. And, you know, one thing I really appreciated about both of these films was that they really showed, they were very intergenerational. They showed a lot through children's eyes. They showed a lot through the older generation's experiences. And I really appreciated that, at least.
Yeah, Ellen.
Well, we're going to watch Latcho Drom tonight because we had a lot of trouble getting onto it. We just kept watching the trailer over.
Me too.
What we were wrong, but Maeve knows, and she'll fix it, and we'll all watch it after this discussion. But the other film, and it was gorgeous. I mean, it was gorgeous, and just the visual, you know, costuming and it was just beautiful. So even in the trailer, and we watched a little bit of the other
music
and the music and dance and all, and so we made, you know, will show us how to finish it tonight, but and she was really interested in that too. But I wanted to get back to Frankie's talk about choice, because the thing I didn't understand and that I haven't had enough time to think about is whether when we talk about Nomadland compared to Acasa, the idea of children was what came up to me, maybe because my granddaughter's here this week as well. So I'm heightened in that way of what you select as a parent for the trajectory of your child's growth. And I really wondered about choice, and I don't understand exactly, Sonia, from your initial introduction, how much of a choice is it? Lifestyle, ethnicity, or a you know, cultural development? You know, goes back 1,000 years. People were collected up in Germany, you said, as being, you know, part of the Holocaust. How were they identified? Was it their lifestyle or blood relationships? I just need a little bit more clarification about that.
Yeah, I think I'll start with Acasa, because that again is a film about a particular family and particular parenting, which I don't think we can prescribe to every Roma family. But you know, that story started out fairly simple, and it revealed the complexities of that particular situation over the course of the film. The father seemed very, you know, anti-establishment. He had disdain for civilization, and there was something noble in that in certain ways. I read a review later that said he was both an anarchist and an autocrat. You know, he was a difficult guy, and he had his philosophy but he also was really kind of a boozer, neglectful of his children, you know, and benefited from society's healthcare. But to get to your question, I felt that, you know, thinking about both Nomadland and this film, I was thinking to myself, perhaps when you're not included, when you don't have equal access, you don't have justice, and your options are not great, you might want to, for whatever reason, the economy's bad, your options aren't great, you might want to go off the grid. You know, you're not included in a way. You might want to disappear, and you might want to go nomad. Those were some thoughts I wrote down. I don't know if I'm getting at the essence of the end of your question. It evolved over the course of your discussion there. Can you repeat what it was that you?
I'm not clear on whether or not it's an ethnicity or it's a cultural coalescence or cohesion of people, or if it is you know, how could the Nazis gather up people with what evidence? Was it lifestyle or was it blood, you know, hereditary into a particular race or, you know, I'm just not clear about the difference between not how Rome is treated, but where the origins of it, I guess.
I think there's not full clarity over that, according to historians, but they do think they came from northern India. But my experience in the Soviet Union and now the former Soviet Union is everything is about ethnicity and nationality. I mean, this is considered to be a group that's racially inferior, and they are marginalized in society. I don't know to what extent they, you know, this case we saw with Acasa, it's a family, a father that didn't want to assimilate, that didn't want to, you know, join civilization, but why, you know, why didn't he want to do that? Maybe because he can't fully participate, you know. There's a backstory we don't know to him, but I think that I'm not a Holocaust, you know, expert, but I'm assuming that they were seen as racially inferior, and they are an ethnic group that you know, they wanted to eliminate.
I'd like to talk later because I think I know what everybody's talking about, but I won't take it now. Everybody speak. I don't want to sit. Hold on.
I see Sandy wants to get in. I have to move downstairs. My computer is too hot.
Well,
I want you to flame out there.
I don't know, but I'm just wondering if they are known by their lifestyle. I suppose that's how they're partially found. But I found it interesting in the beginning to watch the children as a teacher. I mean, they were amazing. They were allowed to be in nature. They could survive for themselves with and fishing, and they found out how to make things without having a class or a teacher to tell them. They were amazing. But the point I found was interesting too is that as they got older, especially the eldest one, he resented his father for not preparing them. And in fact, the father had been educated. So it was very interesting that he was educated, he dropped out, he wanted to live in this lifestyle. And his children, I mean, I think that in my estimation, they were amazing. They were in nature, they learned how to do things, they were together as a family, they helped each other. It was only until they came to the society that the city that seemed to have destroyed their whole life, their whole communication, their whole way of living. And I thought it was a bit unfair of the father, who came from an education and wanted this lifestyle. And while he gave a lot to his children and family, he took away some of the essence that he had.
Yeah, Mick, you're
Yeah, I
jumping
had
in.
a few things to say to maybe build on that too. I just found the Acasa film, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but I just love seeing the boys wrestling and being free. I mean, you had a real sense of freedom there. And frankly, I was conflicted between that lifestyle and jamming them down an educational system, a very different thing, and, you know, different tracks. So, you know, I was conflicted. It was kind of interesting this morning in the New York Times, I read an obituary about a name was a spiritual leader during Wounded Knee. He just passed away. And I realized, wow, you know, Native Americans have been treated in very similar ways. Like, how do we take the Indian out of the Indian? And all the Native children in Canada that were discovered dead. And, you know, you realize that there are peoples that have been just so oppressed and that don't fit into the sedentary lifestyle. I mean, you see that among Bedouin, you know, in Israel even, or other places in the Middle East, where they try to stop the migration of peoples because it's a threat. And So I was thinking about that linkage. Also, it just broke my heart when the second oldest boy in the apartment was talking to the eldest one, and he's crying, saying, you know, we're eating concrete, or whatever he said. It was some line like that. It just tore at me. He wanted to go back, you know, to living the free life that he built. Back to the Leonard Crow Dog thing. The reason I brought it up is apparently his father beat a truancy officer and got him away from his son because he wanted him to retain his cultural identity as a Lakota, you know, Native American. My favorite personal story of myself was once as a young man in Italy. I was playing in an orchestra over there, and I was walking down a street in Rome, and there were some obvious Roma women that very colorfully dressed. They surrounded me and they were singing and laughing and they twirling me around in circles. I had my hand on my wallet, but I had a great time. You know, it was a lot of fun. So, but the linkage here, I was just thinking about the Native American experience, about the suppression of peoples that are migratory. This seems to be so threatening to those of us who are sedentary.
Yeah. That, so I know Don wants to get in. I saw Sonia and Sandy. I didn't want to say that I wrote down that the haircutting scene reminded me of the Carlisle Indian school and those pictures of the transformation of the Indians. And what was interesting in this case was how they complicated that, because the kids were happy to have their hair cut. So it's an interest, and I think, you know, and I think that's true with Native experiences as well. It's not as straightforward as we might think. But I don't know, do we want to, I know Sandy, Sonia, Don, do we want to go to Don because he didn't get to speak yet, and then back to Sonia and Sandy, and then Dieter, Rosemary, Gail, and go for it.
This is a complicated thing, really. Western civilization happened for some reason or another to be more sophisticated. I mean, only sophisticated in getting things like mathematics and things like that, understanding medicine, understanding all kinds of things. These other countries were not as sophisticated. They were just as nice people, but they weren't as sophisticated. I don't know why it happened on the West so much, but it became a great magnet for these people to come to say, oh, you can get this great kind of life because they do so many things. That's what happens here. This one unit did really good and lifted up, and so everybody wants to go to it. That's why people wanted to come to the West and all that to begin with. Even though they were wonderful people, but why did they want to migrate? Because it might be better somewhere else. And that's the situation of the world, the way it is today. And we don't treat them very well, and they're wonderful people, as good as anybody. And they just come from a different background. So I'm just saying why they came to us instead of us going to them.
But they didn't come to us.
Yes, they did. They migrated.
Not this group. They were living alongside of the city, and they were living naturally, something that sophisticated people like our societies, we welcome that. We look at films about it and so on, but these people were actually living in nature and not accepted for that. And yet we have values in our sophisticated world that destroys our world that sustains us. These people, they left rubbish around, but they knew how to fish. They knew how to sing together. They knew how to be a family together, take care of each other. And our sophisticated world, whether it's Australia or us, taking children from these tribal groups and thinking that we can make them better. And is our society really better than what you see in that film, where families are family, they live in filth, and we don't want to do that. We want everything beautiful and all these products. But how do we think that we're the better? They weren't coming to us. They were living separately and happy.
We were more sophisticated in
Are we?
Science and math. Did things that was, for some reason, I don't know why it was the West that did this, but that's what they did. They were able to do things that the other peoples couldn't do. And so
Like
that
survive.
the magnet to draw people to them. I'm not making a judgment on whether it's good or bad.
But is it more sophisticated? Because if you had the tribal people who respected the earth, respected the sun, respected the moon, respected the earth, and those of us who think we're sophisticated and are destroying what sustains us, what is so sophisticated about us?
Yeah,
You know-
Sonia, did you want to get back to Sonia and then Ellen and then
Wonderful.
maybe from the other folks?
Wonderful points. And I kept thinking of this sense, both from Nomadland and these films, of this confinement. And it's just very uncomfortable for me. And the way Latcho Drom ended was really, I think, I haven't read any articles about this, so I'm not sure about the meaning of this, but at the end, they're in Spain and there's a mason who's building a brick wall, and a sense of this like confinement to me, this physical being locked into this sedentary lifestyle. And when I did read a review of Latcho Drom, it talked about this sort of beginning. It was so colorful, it was so filled with celebration and so uplifting, and it was kind of Eden. And that's how the filmmakers chose to portray that. I don't know that that was accurate, but that's how the story was portrayed. And it ended in a way as it began, in kind of a barren atmosphere, but with less joy, with less, with the heavy burden of the persecution that these people have endured in coming west, right? And their lives, had they had their lives improved, right? And I wanted to just read this quote I pulled from the New York Times review of Acasa. And I don't know if it's Acasa or Akasha, but it gets to some of the points that we've been discussing, and about how the film really presented two points of view, whether you're looking from the eyes of the family and their displacement, or you're looking at the interests of the bureaucrats and trying to create this public nature park. And you could kind of feel for both points of view at different times during the film, because it was complicated and complex. And anyway, the quote says, "The film is not static, it's dialectical, constructing its narrative as an argument between two opposed positions, neither of which is fully embraced. There is a nobility to the parents as they try to resist the power of a state convinced of its own benevolence. And the actions of the state are not entirely unreasonable. It's not as simple as taking the side of individualism against government, or for that matter, of being in favor of parks, schools, and a decent social order. That's all fairly abstract, but Acasa is full of ideas because it contains so much life. It's both intimate and analytical, a sensitive portrait of real people undergoing enormous change, and a meditation on what that change might mean. It taps into something primal in the human condition, a basic conflict between the desire for freedom and the tendency toward organization, an argument finally about the meaning of home." And I thought that was so interesting, and it really resonated with me with Nomadland also.
Mhm.
Yeah, Ellen, you've been dying to get in.
Well, I don't really agree with Don, which is not unusual. But I do say that he has a perspective from another time and place, and to think of how we fit into any societal order. So I want to say that what Sonia just talked about, in a way, is the difference between individual and collective. What if we were looking for many families that were living this way, right outside the confines of the society of the buildings, where they all live? How much refuse would there be? How many fish would be caught? How would we impose any sense? How would we live with people that want to live totally individually? And when we go back to Nomad, one of the things that was interesting is these were older people at another time of their life who made this choice. But when you have children and you're raising them in society, and these children were all kind of living on top of each other in a very free state. And, you know, they slept on top of each other, not unfamiliar situation for me. I had 3 sisters, we had 2 beds, you know, I grew up in a house of 8 people. I mean, I know the joy of family and collective, you know, but we weren't the only family. You know, there were a lot of other families that were part of our, the place I went to school and the place that people grew up. And so how did those children fit into anything once their parents are gone? Let's just imagine them gone, you know, and these children are now going to live their life in some way within a society, or they're going to form the same, repeat the same thing that they were, you know, grew up in. So I think when you take a slice like this, and what Don's saying about where people migrate to, you know, they leave their homeland, they leave what's familiar to come to where and why. They want a better life for their children. They want a better life for themselves. So I think that's a tremendous dilemma. I can never imagine how people just left the country that they lived in with family and structure and, you know, all of that, and came here. It must have been because they couldn't fit into the society that they lived in some way, or that they were in danger of things like the Holocaust or persecution in other countries. So I think this is so much a discussion of the individual versus the collective, and then the society not responding to the needs of people who make choices. The way the police treated the young boy for catching a fish. I mean, that was one of the heartbreaking scenes for me. And he said, all I was doing is fishing. You have to pay for those fish, you know, you can't just take those fish. You know, it was, how do you structure anarchy together with society? I mean, there are a lot of people who don't want to live according to the rules of this society right now. In, you know, the administration that they're rebelling right and left with everything. How do we live together peaceably?
Yeah, Sandy, and then we'll make space for folks who didn't jump in yet. Sandy?
Well, it seems to me coming from a rural area, we were encouraged, or we got the message that to have a better life was financial and educational. It wasn't about nature. It wasn't about finding about science, in my view. It was about bettering your life. We have a society that's based on money, not on nature, not on preserving things. And when you say that, you know, that boy was punched for fishing, he could fish in the wild and help support his family. And when he came to civilization, he was arrested for taking a fish out of a pond, because that's the rule. And as far as, I'm sorry if I'm getting too emotional, it's our emotional days. But as far as that those police punching that boy, what parallel do we see in our own society? This sophisticated society that looks at people who are Black or brown or whatever and would rather kill them than have to deal with them. So, you know, we have 2 parallel lifestyles here. One that our sophisticated style looks to nature and beauty and painting and arts, and yet a family that is living in what we might think of as squalor, because we're cleaner and we're more efficient, had love, had a structure, had nature. And then you bring them to a city and it destroys them. Is that what our society offers?
I completely agree with you. I want you to know I completely agree with you. If everyone made that choice, how do we have a society? I totally agree with you about what's the values of what's important, but it just is, I don't think that the film or the situation offers any solutions. It just presents the dilemmas.
Plenty of those around.
Rosemary, Gail, Elliot, Dieter, anybody want to jump in? Yeah, Gail.
I think that, you know, if the family wants to live like that, that's fine, but I think they owe a certain amount, something to their children. Their children, they should have at least taught them to read and write. I mean, they didn't have to learn much else, but to get along in the world. I mean, when the parents were gone, but the children, what were they going to do? I mean, they needed to learn to read and write at a minimum, so they could read signs that said no fishing or whatever to get along. I think they at least owed that to their children, and that was not something they were giving their children. The other question, are there any Roma in the United States?
Can you put her in your lap, please?
There was a TV show. I was looking, maybe it was HBO. I mean, there was a movie with Eric Roberts a little while ago where he was the king of the gypsies in the US. And then there was like a Showtime something, Minnie Driver, I think, was in it. And it was about a Romani family, I believe. And then of course there's My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding.
Oh, I love
Right, which is about itinerant Romani
I thought they were
in the US.
Greeks.
Greek.
Greeks.
Oh, they're Greek. No, I thought
Yes.
they were, no, Greek is the movie, but there's like a TLC show that is about the Romani.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Dieter, did you want to jump in?
Hi, I just have if some things will come back to me, but Mick's point about the kids being happy getting their haircut. I don't think there's a situation where those kids would have been unhappy. They were just bouncing around. It was such a joy to watch that.
Yeah.
The guy, the father, was very intelligent. He told the ranger, I know how to, all about this park and everything and how to treat these trees and all that. But then he's burning this book for one of the little kids, You don't need this,
Yeah.
But I think my impression was always that the Roma were not migrating from one place to the next for a better life. They were migrating because that was in their blood. And they weren't trying to get something from one society or another society. It was kind of, well, maybe they couldn't keep getting money or whatever, but it was, I think that was it. And our experience, a brief experience we had, we were in St. Petersburg, like in 2002, or in Moscow, I guess. And we got on the subway, and this colorful dressed lady gets on with like 4 or 5 kids. And all of a sudden they start swarming around us. We got panicked. We kind of grabbed everything we could and kind of just walked off to get over. And they get on one station and they kind of make their rounds and then they get off the next station and make their living, I guess. But I was wondering a few things. First of all, how did the filmmaker film that documentary?
Yeah, interesting.
Tremendous connection with them. And the other question I had, how old was the mother? She was probably in her 30s.
Yeah.
But she looked like they were really, and the father too. He probably was much younger than he looked.
So I read it was 4 years and 2 handheld cameras.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, it was a fabulous job. Whatever. I mean,
Rosemary, do you want to jump in before we go back to Sandy?
Everyone first, and I agree with what has been stated. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Excellent. This was a missed opportunity. And I think it was very disturbing to me to see a gentleman, Jika, who had lived there for 18 years and wanted to be a caretaker to this new park. It was an opportunity to provide him with housing, he and his family, to provide the children with education, but to let him share his history and his perspective. I saw some real egos butting in the film, and that really upset me because
that knowledge was invaluable and not appreciated. The metaphors, the use of metaphors in this film was incredible. The little bird that they put in a cage, they talk about putting it in a cage and it would die. And the pig being slaughtered, and then it goes right into the urban experience. It was very powerful and profane to me to see that and to feel the rawness and the honesty and the depth of what they were confronting. You saw how they were trivialized and I guess marginalized is a better word, and not respected. The Romanian that yelled at him and told them to go back. It was a clash of cultures, and there was no effort to appease it. It was to diminish it. And I didn't like seeing that. I guess the thing that really finally struck me at the end was they were so alive in their environment, seeing the beauty, seeing the life around them. Maybe it was a squalor, however you want to judge it, but he looked so forlorn and frozen and half dead when he was in front of that gambling machine. And I don't know if you remember that. He had gotten someone pregnant, and it just struck me here, his life force is leaving him after losing that part of himself, that soul. And my context is Alaska. I was a pilot. I used to fly into very frequently to people who are off the grid. And it was very healing to me to get out of Anchorage and to be in that experience and to appreciate their values, because it allowed me to slow down and see what's really important in life. And just as you have all brought it up, we lose that when our greed and our focus on what's really not that important becomes our life. So that's what I wanted to say.
Well said, well said.
I've got Mick and Sandy right next to each other, both of you with your hands up, so.
Hey there, yeah. Talking about loss, it was kind of interesting for me to watch Latcho Drom. I was able to see all of it. You just got to look around, you'll find it. There are some that go from one segment to the next, you know, but it's the full film. But in watching it, I felt this profound sense of loss, I guess you could call it, and also I'm almost ashamed to admit it, jealousy, in a way that the folks in Latcho Drom had this rich cultural heritage, and it came from their ethnic history and their upbringing. They knew all the songs. They sang beautifully. I mean, even this little boys, and you know, both Sonia and I come from a very distinct ethnic cultural background too. We're Norwegian Americans, like 100%. But yet I don't know a single Norwegian dance. You know, I've lost the language. I know a few sentences, and I always was kind of resistant to adopting it anyway, because it was like all the family was kind of into it. But I wasn't. I was looking for a larger world, I suppose. But it's like I have none of that, and I've felt a twinge of jealousy about that, how rich their culture was. I don't know, Sonia, can you relate to that at all?
Yeah, I can, especially that film. I mean, there was this loss, this thread of loss throughout, and there was also a thread of accumulation, you know, in a positive sense, because as they journeyed through these different countries, as I said earlier, their language took in, their music. I mean, if you listen to the flamenco, you know, Spanish part of that film, it's so different than what you saw in Slovakia or whatever, but a thread throughout.
Yeah.
And there was this loss and this draining of that, you know, as they go through the traumas and the persecution over time, but they stay strong and they stay united and they stay very rooted and I loved the intergenerational participation. You see the oldest woman in the room just giving it her all at the end of that film, you know, and the children's belting out the tunes that they know from heart. It was amazing. I actually watched another film in trying to decide which films I would recommend for this. And there's another film that was produced by Martin Scorsese, and it was called A Ciambra. It's about Roma in Italy, a particular Roma family. And there was a quote in that by the oldest, grandfather in the family, and he said, to his grandson, once we were now we're here settled in this kind of difficult, confining public housing or whatever. And now we're here, it's us against the world. And it's just this sense of loss that you're talking about.
Can you put the title in the chat?
Sure.
Yeah. I see Sandy. I know Elliot hasn't said anything yet. So Sandy, you've been trying to jump in, then maybe we'll go to
Well,
Elliot.
if Elliot wants to go first.
Okay, Elliot.
Okay, yeah, I can go first. A couple things. One, as an answer to Don's question, there's a book by, I think he's an anthropologist, Jared Diamond, called Guns, Germs, and Steel. So he talks about, he was walking on a beach in, I think, New Guinea, and one of the locals came up to him and said, how did you, meaning Western society, get all this wealth? After reading the book, it turns out that we were just fortunate. The Western world was fortunate. What started in Mesopotamia, and with the fertility of the land, farmers becoming more productive, the natural resources, the climate, and it gave them time as they developed free time to study, to create. And whereas a lot of areas around the world didn't have that luxury. Maybe over time they would have, but Western world just took advantage of it. And they moved like at lightning speed across the planet. Secondly, I think that, thinking about the Jewish experience here in America and the assimilation that's occurring now among the people who were born in the Jewish religion, I think that's happening to the Roma. I mean, yes, it's nice to see their society, their groups living free and without the stresses that, or at least we didn't see any stresses, but the stresses that we experienced moving through our life. And so I think that they're going to assimilate. In 100 years from now, there'll be stories like Fiddler on the Roof about the Roma. And so I think that it's going to happen because as they blend into society, it's slow, but it occurs. And then secondly, as you start living in societies or living in a more urban areas, we couldn't live in a structured world we live in today without rules, unfortunately, and I think what a lot of people are alluding to here, well, let them do their thing. Well, yes, it would be nice if they can, but it's difficult in a rule-based society.
But who follows the rules in our society? We're in a period of time where it's all being illuminated that there's such corruption everywhere that, weren't we told by our previous gentleman that people who only are stupid who pay taxes? So, we are seeing now in this world how everybody, it seems, that other than us, of course, but, breaks the rules. This is
that rules
of laws that the most people who are on top with with most money and so on, we seem to be seeing an exposure that they don't follow any of the laws that people. I felt the way there was a whirling, we've seen whirling dervishes in Turkey, that where you get into that mode. And I mean, their lives weren't, 100%, but that music, and I love music, so I know how people can be transported, many of you do. And so that music was like a drug. Instead of taking an antidepressant, it held them together. It was beautiful. They had structure. They had, involvement. And so that was amazing. And one of the things in Latchmo that I thought was so touching was the little boy sitting next to his mother on the train platform. And the mother was totally sad about something, like her life was in disarray and so on. And the little boy, who couldn't be more than 7 maybe, he was touched by his mother, and he sees the gypsies on the other side of the track, right? And he goes over with his little money. He knows that they would be paid to do a dance or something. And the way they responded to him, the sensitivity with that little boy to go across the tracks and make his mother smile. I mean, it's my skin is still, it's like, it was absolutely touching, how people from such a different culture could go over the bounds, over the railway tracks, to really touch that family, and not only touch it, but to move it, to change it a bit. I thought it was absolutely a wonderful thing.
Sandy, if I just like to respond for a second about what you said about the rules, previous administration, what happened, unfortunately, in our country. But those are the evolution is constant, and the only thing that's permanent is change. So we lived for 4 years, and those 4 years didn't just start in 2016. They started way before that. But things are changing, and we don't know how they're going to change. We don't know if it's going to be for the good or for the not so good. But we're in a constant move.
I see Ellen, Sonia, I want to say something. Mick wants to say something.
Hey, I just want to say that we all identified with different parts of this film, sounds like to me. And the beauty of the dance and the music and the lifestyle and the sensitive kid. And I have one right sitting here on the couch, just amazingly sensitive kid. I'm going to say I identified with the kid in the movie, at the end of the movie, that was pissed off at his dad. Think about a minute. He did not know his parents were not going to be here forever. He was so mad at his dad for not, for being a loafer, for not preparing him to know how to even write there. He says to him, you didn't even teach us how to write our names. I mean, you had an education, you didn't give us that.
Yep.
I think there's a real generational thing here. And I think I come away with it, society's responsibility to be able to be inclusive of different choices of people and different lifestyles. Where we need to work is on the society that we are a part of, and white privileged people who actually need to extend education and opportunity and so forth for people who choose to live their lives differently, without a little bit outside of the grid or very outside of the grid. We need to be really cognizant of what's happening in our own society so that we can be more inclusive to different people's choices. And the way, instead of rounding them up and putting them in gas chambers and, marginalizing them and disenfranchising them. And I think that the movie raises in me the desire to, teach my granddaughter how to get along in the world that she's going to face when her parents, I'm so glad that she's able to, succeed in the ways that are struggles for her within this culture that imposes these rules on her. But I'm really not for a society that just says, that's anarchistic and says, well, live your life however you want, fish wherever you want. And if the waters get all fished out, then they get all fished out. So, I think that there's a sensitivity level that we lack as people in charge of our own society, of the society where we are the elders, we are the members, we are the ones who need to make sure that we have voting rights for everybody. We have the ability to change, as Elliot was talking about. We're going to have change all the way along. So, I guess I'm heightened by this movie to make sure that the kids of the next generation inherit a world that's fairer, better, more, it gives more choices, you know, dances, the cultures are respected from all different things. I don't think it's a war kind of thing. I think that every generation needs to hand that along.
Why don't we respect others? Why is it, you know, people say if somebody came from outer space, we'd kill them. I mean, how is it we didn't look at the Indians and respect the way they
No,
felt?
I have something to say about that. There's just to reference anthropologists, there's a great book by James Scott called Seeing Like a State. And he talks about how the state came in and organized people, gave us all surnames, for example. And so I was thinking about this, that seems that the difference between Nomadland and this film is that in Nomadland, it's white people opting out of the state. Whereas in this film, it's people who have been chosen, or maybe not, whatever, have developed a lifestyle that's marginal from the state. So here, the folks were forced to come back in, right? And so that seems like inherently a different situation, and in terms of choice. But it also seems that when white people choose to leave the state, it works out okay. I mean, you know, people in Nomadland were very proud of their vans and all the places they could put things, right? When Black people choose to leave the state, it gets more complicated, right? In Philadelphia, we blew up the place where they chose. I mean, it doesn't end well for Black people. So I think that's an interesting sort of privilege and choosing who gets to live outside the state. And because historically, I mean, over the last 500 years, we have been very nervous about groups who have lived outside the state, right? The witches that have been burned. And I think that the Romani sort of fit into that. We're suspect of people. Whereas the Nomadland folks, as well as like those back to the nature white people in like the 70s and the 80s, like we didn't see them as quite as like threatening. I don't know. Mick, Sonia, you both want to say something.
I agree. I think, yeah, we should probably wrap up pretty soon. But one of the commonalities, I'm looking at the list of movies here, certainly Nomadland and the movies we're talking about today, but also, you know, Parasite, The Lemon Tree, Minori. I think there's some common themes here that and lessons here that we all need to be a bit more tolerant of differences and others, and try to put ourselves in others' shoes. And I think that's been sort of a common theme, maybe unknowingly, in the films that we've been watching. And we all struggle with that, even our biases that we're not even aware of. I know I get a little irked sometimes when here in Sedona we have what I call travelers, that are folks that are begging for money, but maybe are college educated and love the Red Rocks. And the other day, I think it was I heard this story, someone offered not money, but an apple. And the person said, well, is it organic?
That last time we talked, I thought you had the story about a vegetarian.
That was me. I gave somebody a sandwich, and he said
that was you. Okay, yeah. I didn't remember who it was, but I mean that's a story. Those are nomads too, and maybe I need to be a little bit more tolerant. I guess I can still be irked about it, in terms of the rules of society or whatever, but I think in general, and it's interesting here in Sedona, talking about, a bunch of rich, pretty well-off people who are, the same race, the privileged race, and, love what they call Indian art, but probably would never want a Native American in their living room. I mean, there is a little hypocrisy that we really need to look at in ourselves too. So But
by the way, before I forget, a friend of mine is helping another friend to develop an Indian healer coming to Sedona, and they are looking for beds. And I'm not there, but if anybody would like to, I could pass your name on, because they're looking for beds for Indians who are coming to do a spiritual presentation. So let me know.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, Flagstaff has the forest people. I think we have forest people here too, who live out somewhere, and now that the forest is closed here because of the fire. So I've been dealing with a little bit on, where those folks going to go.
Is there any place in public space where they can go without getting charged with the anti-camping laws here in Sedona and in Cottonwood? And I think Sedona is looking at a lawsuit coming up because, you know, it's illegal to sleep in public in Sedona.
Yeah.
And that's something that, you know, and here we're reasonably progressive, or at least Democratic Party town. We shouldn't be having laws like that, I don't think. But
Are you having to evacuate?
they are evacuating. Yeah, they can't be in the forest. So a lot of folks, it is illegal to sleep in public in Sedona. So
They close the forest.
Yes, I
And there-
know that, but what about evacuation of Sedona itself?
We're not evacuating, no. And Uptown was ready. It's ready, set, go, right? But then I think that was just pulled back today. The folks in Flagstaff are now not set but ready, so they pulled it back. I think they're getting it under control.
Oh, wonderful.
well, listen,
I
we
know you wanted to say something and Mick reminded us it's time. Why don't you give us a last wrap up? Yes.
Oh, great. I just wanted to chime in a little bit on the concept of assimilation, because I think we all, you know, our relatives who came to this country have all, you know, were products of assimilation, and many groups find it that's the natural path. But, you know, I think in order to, you know, you can't assimilate unless you're being welcomed or allowed to assimilate. And so in the case of the Roma, they're so marginalized that they are segregated educationally. You know, this is still going on now. So these people are not being welcomed to assimilate, and that is going to perhaps change over time. But what do we do with groups that don't want to assimilate, for whom a core aspect of their culture is not assimilating or retaining, you know, their mobility? And Bill and I talk a lot about inconvenient truths ever since that film came out, and how many inconveniences there are to those who are in power, those who set the rules. And, you know, this is just another example. There are a lot of people who are very inconvenient, and different societies are trying to find ways of marginalizing or erasing those people. And it's just another case of that. But I love all this talk about increasing our tolerance and our sensitivity, and how to be truly inclusive, you know, with groups that really don't fit. It's a difficult question, but thank you all for allowing us to talk about these amazing communities.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Conversation and a great.
Can I just say that last night we took our sons to a drive-in movie theater in the Hudson Valley to see a documentary film as part of the Woodstock Film Festival. It was a free showing of a film that's going to come out on Hulu, I think on July 2nd, but it's called Summer of Soul. And it is a documentary, amazing footage from the 1969 Harlem Cultural Festival that went on the same year as Woodstock. Over many weekends in Harlem, and it is a stunning documentary. The footage sat on someone's basement for 50 years. It's never been shown before, and I was moved to tears on a number of occasions watching the film. It's really tremendous. Another musical journey about an American community that, you know, during a revolutionary summer for that civil rights. It's just amazing.
It was reviewed in the New York Times today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, well, we'll gather again probably in 3-4 weeks and be pondering. Send Ellen or Frankie or me suggestions on films, you know, around or whatever, and let's see what we come up with. And it's always been great. I imagine we'll still, until we get the green light, we'll still probably meet on Zoom. You know, we still, it'd be such a loss to not have our out-of-town people here, but you know, we'll see. Maybe we can do that and get together personally too. I envision like, at what's that, Vino di Loco or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know, in the garden, something like that.
Vino di Sedona.
Di Loco, yeah.
Yeah.
In any case, time for my glass of wine. So we'll see you guys, and it's always
Lovely conversation. This is such a great group. I feel like we know each other. It's a lovely back and forth. Thank you all. Thank you, Sonia, for contextualizing for us. really great conversation. And as Mick said, we're a very organic group. So we're taking directions as we move. Don, did you have something to say?
Great.
Gold Tower in Alaska. I've been all over Alaska.
Yeah, last is your.
All right. Okay,
So-
bye-bye, you guys.
Stay cool, stay safe. Enjoy
Bye.
the summer.
Bye-bye.
Well, she doesn't have